Good morning. So I want to introduce our speaker for this morning, Gale Lucas, who's from USC, came all the way out here on a red eye to give a presentation. So raise your hand, everybody. Has everybody started doing the game? No. Okay. Nicole has emailed this, but you can copy it letter for letter if you want. If you do not have your laptop, or if you don't have a laptop, pair up with somebody, please, and just sit next to somebody and say, "Okay, let me look over your shoulder." All right, and don't be bashful. Just grab somebody, and if you see somebody who doesn't have a laptop, say, "Oh, come on, sit with me." Gale will give a very quick wrap on what the game is, right, before they start.
They'll be learning that through the Qualtrics survey, but you get to play a game.
Okay, so when you log in here, it should be all self-explanatory. So the first half hour, we'd like you to play the game, fill out the survey. If you have questions, just raise your hand, and Gale will be kind of wandering around the room. So rather than give detailed explanations, it's better
experiential learning.
Yeah, learning on the way. Okay, and Gale and I have worked together for a while. She's a collaborator with PlayStation. And she's a psychologist. She's at the Institute for Creative Technologies. Is that right? At USC, and her specialty is games and psychology, but also things related to persuasion, which I talked a little bit about on last Monday. But she's also worked in areas of negotiation and other sort of psychological studies. All right, so I won't babble on any longer now. So enjoy the game, and Gale will give you kind of a spiel when you're done, maybe 30 minutes from now. So raise your hands when you need to.
Can you close your windows just to make sure you're not using a seat? Close the window, yeah. Sorry? Right there.
I think I cannot find this link.
So check you might be typing it in just ever so slightly wrong. Check an email from Nicole. She sent around the link. Okay. Yeah, and if you look up, yeah, oh my.
Yeah, there's just.
Yeah, if you go back, it was very just much at the top of the place where the stairs. Like, so if you go back to the stairs, it'll be right
I
there.
have no clue. That was 10 minutes ago. I've done so much running.
Oh no.
Maybe we'll see some structures, some hidden structures.
So Gale's going to take over from here for 45 minutes, and I told her that you guys are a fairly active and vocal group, so by all means, jump in with questions or reactions, and so Gale, take it away.
Thank you so much, Mike. Yeah, and please, oops, is it gonna? show my content. It's been plugged in. It was showing pretty consistently. Oh, unplug it and plug it in. There we go. So please, yes, interrupt me. I love questions. That's the fun part of this. And now you get to know what this was all about, right? Like, why did I have you, participate in this? Again, sorry, Stream Pixel seemed like a good idea. We're going to try a different service after some of the issues and hiccups here. But hopefully you got to at least have a taste of experiencing this game. And to step way back to what Mike was talking about in terms of where I come from, my background. I am a psychologist. I am partly using the game as a platform for trying to have real experiences to where users can show in their own decisions and decision making in the game to test a psychological theory, but also we get to explore the use of AI in gaming. And I know you've heard more about that. You'll hear more from another SIE employee. Ryan will be speaking later today about that and talk way more broadly about this than I'm going to. I'm just going to give you a snapshot of this project and how I'm interested in using AI in gaming to leverage what we've been researching and developing, making artificial intelligence capable of social influence for the goal of having gaming be more fun. So I am a gamer, and I come to this project with my own preferences, my own love of gaming, and my favorite thing is the storyline. I love the storylines, I love the decisions, and I get very frustrated sometimes in games where you are deciding between three things that are summarized by a very short phrase, and you're assuming that your character will say something that is represented here, and then it'll say something totally different. And you're like, wait, no, that's not what I thought you were going to say. No. And even worse than that, for me, is something like in Last of Us, where I know it definitely fit with the experience of this game, and it's kind of the zeitgeist it goes for. But there's even points in this game and others where you don't get to make a decision at all as a gamer, right? Like, you are stuck and your character is saying something and you're like, that's not what I would say. So from my perspective, the most fun thing about gaming and the most potential that we can realize with AI in gaming is to have the conversations and the engagements and interactions with the NPCs be more engaging, but also more in your control. And so what AI does is, it allows us from just, having these drop-down menus that have been most games forever. You have these conversation wheels or the topics drill down, and you choose. And can that be replaced with, I'm actually just talking in my natural language? And I am, among other things, a natural language processing researcher. And so there's a whole world of previously machine learning, now generative AI, all the LLMs out there, of research trying to understand how do we make AI more conversational, better dialogue partner. And my goal is to leverage that in gaming, to make gaming more fun, to make the games and the interactions more, have more agency on the user side of thing, where you get to say exactly what you want. Now, it still might not bring out the outcome that you wanted, but at least your character will say what you want because you actually get to type it in, right? And maybe someday you'll speak it out loud and it'll do great text-to-speech and it'll put it in there and all that. But at least the capabilities of being able to type what you want to say rather than being stuck with the options you have. And my work generally is in social influence and understanding how people and AI influence each other. And so in the context of gaming, I'm very interested in personalities of the NPCs because they seem very interchangeable right now in many games, but not all games. Some games we have, and a couple of these are my favorites, especially I love the Mass Effect universe and the Elusive Man, and he's so persuasive. He's such a great NPC. His character's so strong, it makes me think all characters could be like that. Now, you probably then would spend a lifetime in one game and never get anywhere, but still, it opens up a lot of possibilities if we had more realistic personalities for characters in games that are run by the machine, by the AI, right? And so as a psychologist with a background in social psychology and personality psychology, can I leverage what I know? Can I leverage the knowledge that is in psychology about how people interact, how people think, how people talk, how people persuade? And all of these characters are examples of very persuasive NPCs that really feel like they have a personality to them, to make it more fun. And again, a little bit blast from my past, something that, kind of bridging that with one of the first games and AI that I played with when I was young. Yes, it looked exactly like this. And there are other examples of this. This is the one that I played with Dr. Sabazzo. There's also Eliza, where the character is, wasn't even AI, it was rule-based, it was not very intelligent, but you got to text chat, in this case with a doctor. Eliza was also a therapist, but they had two very different personalities. Eliza, if you look her up, was, very nice, very supportive. Dr. Sabazzo was a jerk. Like, he will say things, I should pull this up, it got down a little. You got to see the rest of this. Oops. Is that, I have no friends. Are you sure you have any friends? No, like I said, I don't have any friends. That's not my problem. Like, he was a terrible doctor, but he was really fun to interact with, and I would spend hours chatting. Yeah, there weren't a whole lot of games to choose from at the time, but the proliferation there is today. But I would talk to him just to have the fun of, poking at this. And now with GPT, you obviously have a lot better abilities than, this kind of level, but we're far from leveraging those capabilities for enjoyment, for engagement, like was possible in the 90s. So you then got to play this game within the context of Days Gone, like Mike mentioned. This is a Sony game, and we recreated it. That's not the actual Sony game. That was our poor recreation of it, just for this purpose of, in today, you getting to have that experience of what it would be like to be persuaded, maybe, by an NPC in a game. But ultimately, so we can do this research and do a proof of concept about, what it would be like to have AI, in this case, GPTs in the background, but it could be Claude, it could be, anything. We can and have trained, and had prompts that work for different LLMs to be able to have these persuasive conversations. And we chose, when we were designing this research originally, a controversial, in a way, but very non-consequential decision in a Sony game. So there's lots of consequential decisions that abound, and then you can read about them on Reddit, and everyone has their opinions and goes into it. This decision about the medicine box and whether you give the medicine box to Tucker or to Copeland in Days Gone #1 has some debate on the internet, but it has no consequence. You get, one kind of item, you get a weapon from Copeland, and motors, or from Tucker, and from Copeland you get a motorcycle parts, right? So in the game it doesn't matter, but people care. You can see whole Reddit threads about like why you should give it to Tucker or Copeland and why one's better than the other. But currently, in the game, it's literally, they talk a little bit, but it's very rote. There's not any persuasion from Tucker or Copeland as to why. It's that drop-down menu feel, right? So what if we thought GPT could serve as the brain behind Tucker and Copeland, where they could actually be trying to persuade you to give them the medicine as opposed to the other side. This also goes back to, again, my glory days. So thank you for reliving them with me. But I played Myst. It's a very old video game, but there's the two brothers, and one wants you to give them the blue pages, the other one wants the red pages, and give them. Turns out they're both evil. But sorry, spoiler alert. Should have said that before. But they just keep saying, "Bring me the blue pages." They don't say why. They don't justify. They don't persuade, other than kind of threatening you and yelling at you. So this possibility is Tucker and Copeland then actually giving real persuasive attempts using human-like persuasive strategies that we know from psychology to then have the user get to experience these two people actually arguing for their point and you getting to make that decision, making it more, experientially meaningful, even if it still doesn't have consequence in the game. So this goes to the research that was done. This is actually done by researchers in computer science, not by psychologists, but they leveraged, they gathered a data set for the idea of towards building personalized persuasive dialogue systems for social good. So in this case, it was a study where they were trying to have, they had collected data with two humans interacting with each other, one trying to persuade the other, to ultimately build an AI that was persuasive. But along the way, they did some social science type psychology research and tried to identify and categorize the different kinds of persuasive techniques that were being used in this data set. And so they have these categories, and we leveraged this, talking about, well, what should Copeland and Tucker say? How should they be persuasive? These actually became, as I'll show later on, we ended up doing a paper with them. They became colleagues of ours, but the first ask was, hey, we love your paper, can we have your data? And so we not only had from the paper itself, it listed out these different persuasive appeals, but we got to see examples of them in the data. And we got to see, by crunching the data, which this analysis had not been published, is what kind of persuasive techniques are more persuasive, and for whom, to derive our first attempt at this research, which you're seeing the second attempt. You get to see a much more engaging, fun, but I want to tell you the story of how we got to this study that you guys got to take part in. Well, you're not actual participants. That's why we're not paying you. But you got to at least have the experience and maybe give us some feedback. So from these categories that our colleagues identified, I saw, and thanks to help from Mike, designed characters that have an emotional appeal, that pull at your heartstrings as to why you should give them the medicine box. But then we found in the data that there were two other appeals that only certain kinds of personalities liked. So the credibility appeal is like, I'm trustworthy, you know me, you know I'm good for it kind of approach. And people that are strong in their power motive were very responsive to someone else acting powerful. And in contrast, self-modeling is a persuasive appeal where I say, well, I would do it for you. Or in the case of the donation, I donated, why don't you consider donating too? And people with more kind of what's the term? I'll actually put it up here. Sorry. Kind of self-direction are more persuaded by that. So in this designing the version of our first study, we had people randomly assigned to talk to Tucker or Copeland first. So they got a version of Tucker, a version of Copeland, a la a classic kind of scientific, social science experiment. The first one they talked to had emotional appeal. And then the next one they talked to had either the credibility appeal or self-modeling. And it wasn't nearly as fun. It maybe worked a little easier. We didn't have as many bugs, but it was just in the chat format. So they learned about the context of Days Gone and then had this chat with Tucker and Copeland via the chat GPT kind of interface. So we've replaced that. You guys actually got to play a video game, but at the time they just chatted, and we also had asked people about their personalities. So the prediction based on the data from our colleagues, the social good data set that I just referenced, was that, compared to the emotional appeal as a default, that for people that were high in power motivation, like we saw in their data set among humans where they were trying to persuade each other to donate, that they would be more persuaded by the credibility appeal, and people with high self-direction, so they kind of are interested in autonomy, choosing things for themselves, would be more driven by the self-modeling approach, which would then replicate what we found in their data. But of course, that had to happen again, not only as science we want to replicate, but we've switched context now. We have AI. And so what we found as a result of that study is that people weren't just choosing randomly between Tucker and Copeland. Actually, this is highly significantly not random between the two, but what swamped everything was the emotional appeal. The emotional appeal worked far better than either of the other two appeals, kind of thinking that was the default, that's what most people would use. I guess I was pretty right about that, but it meant that then there was less of this little sliver of people choosing the other character, whichever one, again, randomly assigned, was the other appeal. And it didn't matter which the other appeal was. And it didn't matter if it was Tucker or Copeland. It was just that, okay, people are being persuaded by this strong emotional appeal. And the characters you saw today in the game, we leveraged that. And so they got to benefit from this prior research where we saw emotional appeal rules in this context. And both characters are using an emotional appeal, but they did it differently. So we saw no differences between the other two techniques. It was not related to personality, unlike the previous data that we borrowed from our colleagues and analyzed, finding that these motivations were driving or related to what people found persuasive. We did not find that, and instead just found the overwhelming power of the emotional persuasion. So we took a step back and we said, okay, study one's done. We didn't find what we thought we'd found, but we still learned a lot, right? We learned that the emotional appeal works. We learned that people are actually listening to these characters and aren't just choosing randomly. They're actually engaging with them. And we learned that ChatGPT is great for powering that, having our NPCs actually make persuasive arguments, so that worked. But it's kind of a boring chat interface that people didn't really do more than they had to with because it was just a chat. So could we then take it the next step and reorient, say, let's build a real game so that people can make this decision in games, and let's rethink what might drive people in their persuasive preferences. So what might people find more persuasive based on their preferences and based on their personality, given that this research that we were trying to replicate didn't replicate for their personality in terms of their motivations. So we turned to a totally different theory. That was from personality psychology. This is from social psychology. And in addition to that people can switch between what we call construal levels, people have default and native ways of walking around the world and thinking about the world that is captured by construal level theory by Trope and his colleagues. And so this theory basically says that you are either more of an abstract thinker or a concrete thinker in the way that you view the world. So if you are what they call high construal level, you engage in abstract thinking. You are that little kid that says, but why, but why, but why, but why? and you're more interested in the big picture, the long-term consequences, the long-term mission or values or guide that you have. Individuals who are more low construal level are more concrete, more focused on the details, more focused on what actual task do I have to do. Yeah, the mission's there, but I want to focus on the tasks and knock them out. And therefore more oriented towards the immediate decisions and outcomes and the details. And you need both of these people in the world, right? And we as human beings, even if you have a default, I'm more high construal level, anyone want to admit being more low construal level? Anyone think more about the details? It's actually a lot of programmers do. Yeah, we have at least our cameramen. No, you guys are all high-level abstract thinkers, even as like programmers. Because I know a lot of programmers that are more low construal level. They're just like, just give me the code. I want to work in the code. I want to solve that little bug. Nobody like that? It depends. It depends. And that's very true. That's exactly what I was leading to, is it depends on the context. And that's exactly why I developed a parallel measure to the measure of construal that you guys got at the very beginning before you started the game, because different people play games for different reasons and with different construal levels. So some people want to go in there and it's just like, I want to forget about the world. I want to shoot things. I want to find coins. I want to make sure I have all the loot. I want to just do my thing. And they're at a more low-level construal when they play games. And other people, regardless of their construal level that they are for other things, like for work or family or daily tasks or what have you, they are more abstract or higher construal level when they play games. They're always focused on the mission. I personally get bothered by the annoying side quest that's just like, bring me another fill in the blank, right? Because what does that have to do with the mission? What does that have to do with the story? You could probably tell from the way I talked about like my love of games about being the story, that I was high construal level when I game, and I am. And so that's why we created that measure, to see if we measure people's construal level in gaming, if we can match their construal level and talk to them using their own language and using their own framework, will it be more persuasive? Will they enjoy it more? Will they listen more to that character? So we come back, as you guys experienced, to that decision between Tucker and Copeland, but instead of using, the two persuasive techniques before, the emotional appeal or the credibility appeal, we're having them use the emotional appeal always, but take either their language to talk about the emotions and the emotionally compelling reasons for just choosing them, giving them the medicine box at either a high level of construal or a low level of construal. And so this is the game you experienced. So this is the why behind what I had you guys do. And remember, this is what it's like in the original game. It's a very simple decision. You have a little conversation. We took that moment, drilled into it, and gave you this experience for several reasons. One, again, to get the high-level picture of why we're here, as a proof of concept that AI can do this, and that it might drive your guys' decision-making in the game, but also it contributes to the psychology literature, because there's been some evidence in education and marketing that matching someone's construal level makes it more persuasive, but there's a lot of contexts, including gaming, where it has not even been touched on. So we wanted to contribute in that way as well. So this is what you did in our version of Days Gone, our little recreation, is you first took that pre-survey that I was describing, that you guys all went through and said whether you were high or low construal. We categorized you. Some of you might have been in the middle. Well, we chose whichever one predominated, even if it was by 1 point. But we also have the measurement of how strongly you were more high or low construal to be able to do some correlational analyses. But for the sake of the study, we just gave you one designation as high or low, because part of what we did in the rest of the game is we want to confirm that. We want to use the game context to not only confirm what construal level you're in, but as the idea towards future research where we wouldn't even have to do a survey, where we could just see you play the game for a while, and can we use the decisions you make, the language you use to infer, again, using machine learning, other techniques, what construal level you have, because it might be different at the moment. At any given moment, you might feel like, today I'm all about the tasks. And so we can measure you're in a lower construal, so let's have the characters meet you where you are. And then finally, we set up these decisions in the game. Besides, I'll walk you through exactly, because I know not everybody, unfortunately, got through the whole game. But at least you can see where it was going. And if you did get through much of the game, why we were asking you what we were asking you, and why the characters what they were doing, building up to these decisions where you had to choose between the two characters. And did you guys notice that they used different language? Did you see this construal level? Where one of the characters was very like, it's all about the world and the universe and saving humanity, and the other one's just like, we need it now, help, please, it's immediate focus. Yeah? You guys saw that? Well, good, it worked. And we want to then see if people who we measured at the beginning of being more low or high construal level did indeed have those preferences for the character and were more likely to choose to give the medicine box, or our other decisions, if you got further, there were other decisions just to reinforce the point, see if they preferred that character that talked their language. So again, you guys all did this in the pre-survey. There were these questions that we generated that is a construal level measurement in gaming survey. And you, as I talked through, got put into one category or the other just for the purposes of the game, but we do have your measurement. We're not using your data. I say this as if your participation was for your own enjoyment, and if you did get to the end or want to write me an email later and tell me feedback, we very much appreciate your feedback, but we're never gonna analyze your data and publish it, right? This is for you, this is for us, this is, we'll actually pay participants, through Mechanical Turk or something like that to be participants in the future. But for them and for you, we first want to know, are you high or low construal level for gaming? And then this is where it really matters. And this is the difference, that if you were looking over the shoulder of the person next to you and they had a different construal level than you, you might have seen, hey, I didn't get those questions. That first character, when you walked up to her, she asked you some questions, and those questions depended on what we rated your construal level as from the survey. And so we gave you questions that would reinforce what we thought your construal level was. So if you were rated as high construal, you got questions like, if we were succeeded at surviving as a species, what's the most important thing to rebuild? Whereas if you were recorded by our survey as having low construal level, then we wanted to reinforce that and said, when a zombie jumps out, which weapon are you pulling out first? And you answered a couple of these questions to make sure you're still in that construal level for the case of testing going forward from here. So this was like a reinforcement stage. And then the following items, where you kind of talked along the way to these other characters, was simply to see, do we see behavioral differences? Do we see text differences in the text you write? Do we see that, if we ask you about what you're thinking right now, is it going to be different based on your construal level, so that in the future we could use your decisions, what you say, to infer what your construal level might be, to spare you the survey at the beginning, or to capture where you're at the moment, right? So our next question, you were talking to the next character along the way who made you text for 100 characters, right? And you had to answer 2 questions where we want to create algorithms from ultimately the data of real participants to see, can we identify construal level? Will there be a solid predictor, a classifier, based on the kind of text people are using in the game? So is this one possibility for inducing and figuring out people's construal level during gameplay? And so yeah, we use it as a check just to check that it's working. You're still in the construal level we thought you were, but later we want to use it to actually measure construal levels. So we have both interests in this particular game. And then you probably saw these. They came out of nowhere, where you had to choose which way. Now there's a back in construal level as a theory in the science that there's a way that they typically ask people to identify themselves as having a certain construal level isn't always by those long questions. It's these kind of, choose one that's best for you, or behavior identification form is the original, where they ask you, tell me which of these is writing for you. And is writing putting paper to pencil and spelling out words, or is it expressing yourself, right? And so people who are more high construal level will say it's expressing myself, where people who are low construal level will say it's putting pencil to paper. And so we created some games or some questions that could be just part of the game, part of the conversation, to try to see, does this type of measurement work in game, to open up that possibility. And then finally, you guys got to have a choice of which way you went. And the theory would say that another way of getting at, not just asking you questions, but seeing what you do. And this is, again, that idea of like, do you like to go on every side quest? What side quest do you like to go on? One with a story and mystique versus just get money from it, right? Will those kind of choices in a game be indicative of your personality profile? And so we just put one in there to as a proof of concept, which way you went. So the theory would say that you'd just go up and directly on to the next task if you're low construal level, whereas if you're high construal level, given the way that we talked about meeting the trader, you might have made that choice instead. And then finally, this is where rubber meets the road in terms of actually measuring the outcome of our study. So we want to demonstrate, like we tried to demonstrate before, that people's personality might lead them to be more persuaded by one type of NPC or another type of NPC based on the kind of language and message and rhetoric they're using. So as you saw, Copeland and Tucker use different strategies. And you guys already echoed for me, thank you, that you saw those differences. So if this theory is right, and if it's borne out in our context of people playing, Days Gone recreation in this game, then people who are high construal level should be more persuaded by the character, again, it's random, that is using high construal level language and framing, and vice versa for low construal level. And then we wanted to see, was that just for this really critical decision, or does it also play over to the decision of whose camp you're going to protect? If anybody got to shoot the zombies? Somebody tell me, yes, you got to shoot zombies, right? Who are you shooting zombies for? One camp or the other? We want to see, do you make that same decision twice, or do people switch around? It's an important question. If we're going to use this as a gauge of it working, is it consistent, or are people going to switch? And then finally, we threw in, give somebody some firewood as a one last minute little, let's see how if it works. And then that's it, right? You guys, everybody that got through the whole game got to make the firewood decision. And then, in theory, if you were a real participant, we'd have your data to try to test this particular hypothesis. So at this point, I want to look at the time. I have 10 minutes. I want to give you just the context very quickly of that this is just one snippet, and point you to a paper that we wrote with the people that wrote the Persuasion for Social Good paper, and came together and said, hey, there's a there. There's something special about what we're doing. In natural language, I'll go back to that if anyone wants to take a picture. In natural language research, there's two camps, not just camps like Tucker and Copeland. There are two camps in terms of research. There's the task-oriented dialogue that's like slot filling, and like, you getting an AI assistant to tell you the right way to, book a train ticket or something like that, right? And whereas there's these in contrast to that, these open conversations where you're just chatting with GPT or you're chatting with Alexa or Siri or whatever, and it can be about anything. And those two worlds are very divergent, and they don't really speak to each other much in natural language because they view what their task is as very different. And we think that social influence tasks like persuasion, Mike noted that I also do work on negotiation, clinical healthcare and mental health settings. These are all ones where we actually bridge and blur the two worlds, because when the NPC or AI more generally is trying to get you to do something, hopefully for your good or social good or your enjoyment or your mental health, whatever reason, not for trying to swindle money out of you, which of course you may walk away from this saying that Dr. Lucas says there's going to be a future where AI can convince me of something. I better think about that next time I'm negotiating with an AI, that it's going to try to get me to give up on getting my refund. Right? Don't give up on getting your refund. It's persuasive. Keep at it. You don't have to be persuaded, and knowing that AI can persuade you can be very helpful going forward for your world. Because, but for AI researchers, the marrying of these two worlds where there's a task and you actually have to do a task comes from the task-oriented content of persuasion, health habit, negotiation, but you have to do social things in these. You can't just fill slots. You can't just say, well, I need a train ticket that leaves at this time and arrives at that time, and I want an overnight car and blah, blah, blah. There's actual real social engagement with self-disclosure, empathy, using these social influence techniques like persuasion or some of the skills that are required to, meet somewhere in the middle in terms of negotiation. And so we believe that social influence dialogues marry these two sides together and open new possibilities for AI. And I'll leave this just on the screen of, it's not just in gaming. I can talk about some of these ideas, but I want to leave time for questions as well, because I've talked at you fast, I've talked at you a lot, you've played a game. What do you guys think? What do you guys want to know? Yes?
I'm curious to know how you prompted the GPT differently for Focus and Tucker.
Yes, so one of them is randomly assigned to have, they both have their backstories. We developed backstories so they can reference that from our previous work, but we basically describe what construal level is and ask the LLM to use that construal level in their conversation, and it works pretty well. But it's an interesting point that persuasion is pretty easy, right? These techniques are not hard. Something like negotiation is much more challenging, and we had to do a way more and actually have to take a modular approach to have different modules for different things, and it's a much more complicated prompt engineering challenge for that. Anything in particular that you were wondering more about for how we prompted them? So that was just out of the box. We tell it what construal level theory is, we tell it the emotional appeal, we tell it the backstory, and it's able to spit it out. Yeah. Yeah.
That's very interesting. But I was wondering for CL metric, are you considering to add some other modalities too? So right now you are relying on text. But I was wondering, for example, where users are looking in the environment, how do they can.
Yeah, we would love to. I mean, the theory has suggestions about that. The problem is with all human decision making and prediction is how much of that is going to be driven by other factors. And if it's only a tiny little amount of their where they're looking is determined by their construal level, it's going to be hard to then make a predictor from it. So yeah, we're looking at a little grosser kind of things like their behaviors, their decisions, their text, also those like A/B choices. But it would be really amazing if we could find something more low level, like where they're looking or the time to make certain decisions or the time to go certain ways, if it really was indicative and predictive and distinguishing between the two levels. Great question. I saw there was another, yeah.
Yeah, also several questions. The first one is matching the construal level of the player. Does that always lead to more fun?
I don't know. We want to see that. That's why we asked people. I don't know if everybody that finished it got to the end, but we want to ask them questions about how much fun and enjoyment, and we don't know. I mean, that's the theory right now, but we have to test it empirically. So maybe, hopefully, but maybe not.
My second question may be related to what she was asking. I'm curious about maybe other modalities because I feel chat is very mechanical and it's very mentally exhausting.
Yeah.
And it can take away from the fun of the game. I have to sit down and start typing. I'm working. But I'm also curious, are there any other ways that you can also like, gather? I mean, as software engineer, we would call it telemetry, and using that to get behavioral analytics from the user and trying to understand what their higher level goals are, and even understanding their personality types and maybe their values and how they want to engage with the world. Are there any like established frameworks or methodology we can actually apply to get?
So in the social sciences, no. It's too disparate, right? But engineers are borrowing from the social sciences, and I believe that there's a lot of possibility here. I don't know of any established ones that have done that, partly because of the challenge of creating situations where it's not about the game and that I have to do this, right? Like that, is there the right degrees of freedom, so to speak, that we can control for, that everybody has to go a certain way, and remove that variability and actually extract the variability that actually has to do with somebody's personality and their intentions and things like that. And I would love to do that. I think it's fascinating, but it's a big challenge. Yeah.
I'm curious, was the game that we played, was that pretty close to, or exactly what other testers went through? Or is this a new version?
This is a new version. So what people went through previously in our previous study was literally just a chat interface, right? Like they had a chat. It was like ChatGPT. And so this is going to be the new study that we're going to release, and you guys are getting to be the first, people to see the study before it's, run. And obviously we will learn some things. Primary thing is StreamPixel is not our friend, in spite of the money we're paying for him. So we'll have to figure that out. But the basics of the game are what our participants are going to experience.
I'm curious. I think for me, as opposed to a chatbot in which that interaction kind of has a little bit of distance, when we're so used to in gaming, running around in these worlds, I felt like what I was trying to get out of each of the characters, especially with the chat interaction, was hearing more about what informed their perspective of they're taking such a strong stance of, oh, this is important right now, this is important, for broader strokes, and I just simply was not able to get there by any point. I'm wondering if you are planning to add just any amount of prompting to add any specificity to be able to bring out the specific moments of, oh, my sister was killed, or I mean that's a terrible example.
No, but we've done that in the previous game. Part of the worry methodologically and scientifically is that watered down the effect, right? So from a scientific perspective, all that adds noise. So if we can show proof of concept that it actually works with this, and then add back in that interest, that variability, that there's it's a double-edged sword. It's a choice, kind of design-wise from an empirical perspective, but it's a hard one, and we want a study 2. So this we want to prove, and then we want to move on to study 2, where it can actually detect your construal level, and then we want to bring in the nuance.
That makes total
right?
sense from a study design perspective. I think for
From
me,
a user experience perspective,
disconnected from both characters, and it led me to be like,
it's a little too strong.
Yeah,
we may have to dial that back, and you guys are we're thankful that you are able to give us this feedback, because that is something that we know we've dialed up a lot, and we may need to dial back before we release it. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Kind of building off of that, I think with the absence of some of that, there's I definitely hit the issue with the bots hallucinating, telling me things that weren't true, that influenced my decisions that I don't think would have been calculated in whether.
Out of curiosity, for sharing for the group, what did it hallucinate?
So like they told me different locations about where the box was. I asked what it looked like. I didn't realize we weren't actually going to find it. So I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah, you already have it, so.
And so yeah, one told me he was in the woods, and I was asking Kobe more about. I was like, if you know that it's there, like why did it get left there? He was like, oh, somebody tried to steal it and they left it. I was like, well, if you saw that happen, why didn't you get it? And this is why I was so like, is he lying and that's part of this? And like I'm trying to figure that out because I had that conversational element. I thought that there was like a reason to have 4 back and forths, and I was really trying to get
it from it, yeah.
To be like, okay, like why should I help one of these people? So like my decisions weren't really based on the emotional appeal. I was actually really annoyed by the big Oscar speeches I kept getting from.
Yes.
But I still helped her because she wasn't lying to me and the other person was.
And so that would add variability in the wrong way, right? So we want to strike that balance, and this is very helpful for us to know to strike that balance because we want to absolutely make it, yes, we want to be a little heavy-handed because we want to do proof of concept, but if we're too heavy-handed, we get that pushback.
Also, Cope tried to convince me to help them out because they were way better armed and ready to defend themselves, and I was like, well,
then why do you need the medicine box, right? They'll be more shot up. Yeah, that's very interesting. Part of it too is that this is one of the challenges with working with LLMs. They change the backbone. And so we have it, and we're like, wait, it worked. And then they change the backbone, and we're like, now we have to re-engineer it because they changed the backbone between. So that's another issue that we have had happen to us several times. We wish we could just freeze it, but we don't necessarily have as much money as researchers as we would wish. But thank you guys all for your comments and your thoughts. It's very helpful. And I will type in somewhere very quickly my email address. So besides just reaching out to me for any, if you want to know something, some paper I've talked about, anything, but also if you have further comments or questions or ideas or feedback, bless you, please share. Oh, I gotta share the screen. Oops. There we go. I mean, you can Google me, I know, but this makes it one step easier and one more likely for you to just shoot me an email. So I have gone over, I'm sorry, but you guys are amazing. And if you have more, I'm also going to be around for a little if you want to talk with me one-on-one. But I know you guys have another lecture. Again, I'll be there with you guys in a half hour in another room, the regular room. And I'll see you there, but get food, take care of yourselves, bio break, all that.